Yes.
How do you get somebody in with OCD? I was real touched by your story. My brother has OCD real bad. Wears the gloves and gloves on and everything. So the thing is, I've been trying to get, and I'm an LPC, and I still can't get him in the treatment.
Sure.
He has real bad cancer. I was able to go 6 years ago. He had cancer. It was just all in the skin. I was able to get him to, go to the doctor because they won't take shots. He got burned. They won't even take the shot.
Okay.
Stuff like that. So I don't know what to do other than
Sure.
try.
Yeah, so the question was, how do you get an adult who's treatment resistant to treatment? And I wish I had the answer. The best thing I always say is start with education. So, let him know that you heard my talk today and, encourage him to watch it or to go to my website and hear me. I have different talks posted on my website as well as other individuals. I have like Ethan Smith and Chris Tronson and Jeff Bell and some other big OCD advocates with their stories. Encourage him to start there, right? So listening to talks, encouraging him to kind of become more educated on other people who have OCD, their story, their life, what it's like. I always say start there and then slowly introduce him to treatment if he's interested. But if he's not interested, you can't force it when they're not a minor, right? That's one of the reasons my mom made the choice she did, is she said, I've only got a few more years to do this before I don't get that choice anymore. And so, I think it's really important that you just kind of educate him with, this is what I saw today and I was inspired and I think there's help available for you. Here's some links. And slowly do it versus pushing it on him.
Yeah, because you found something that I didn't know. He said, I don't remember we used to get like that as a teenager because we're like 2 years different. And he said, oh yeah, I used to iron my socks.
Yeah. Question was, he didn't see it as a child, but maybe it was there. But sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. I mean, sometimes it starts in adulthood and it really wasn't there during childhood. Other questions? Yes.
A question about medication. Was there ever a time that they tried different medications when it started, when you were in
With me
school?
personally?
Yes.
Great question. So, sorry, and I didn't talk about meds at all. So, medication is also one of the treatment, obviously, options for OCD. So the medication most often used are SSRIs, SNRIs, or TCAs. If you go to the IOCDF's website that I talked about earlier, they have a lot more information on research and efficacy and medication and all of that. Medication, as we know, the American Psychiatric Association and the American Psychological Association, right? So psychiatrists and psychologists rarely agree on anything. Shocking. It is what it is. This is the one disorder. There is a consensus among both organizations profoundly that ERP is the most effective treatment, but often it's done in combination with medication. So what we see is that medication is often very helpful to get individuals to a point where they're willing to engage in the treatment. And for some individuals, the medication is important for them to stay on for the rest of their life. Some individuals want to get off of it. Some individuals never want to take it, right? There's all sorts of different steps. What's critical is that they have to be engaging in that ERP simultaneously. When I was 15, my parents were pretty strong on the fact that when I went to Menninger, they didn't want me to go on medication. I had not yet ever been exposed to effective treatment. And so their viewpoint was, let's get her in effective treatment first, and in a couple weeks, let's reassess and see if we need to get her on medication. I did so well in treatment. I was so immersed and really seeing huge benefits that I never went on medication, specifically for my OCD. I do take medication and have a prescription for sleeping if I'm really struggling with intrusive thoughts and I feel like I'm going to need a good night's sleep, because I know when my vulnerabilities are increased, my illness is worse. But OCD-specific medication I didn't take. I've continued with ERP. Yes?
This is a three-part question. If you could talk about what you mean by contamination or how something becomes contaminated, if you could explain a little bit about the lack of showering, and also what your OCD looks like today.
Great question. Lots of questions. So what is contamination? So contamination can be anything. We can be talking about fears of germs, household contaminants, fears of the sun, disease, bloodborne illnesses. My contamination was often around germs and illness. So I have never been worried about dying. Obviously, it's something that I feel like I'll be at peace, so it's not something I've been worried about, but it's always been, if I get sick or I get contaminated, then I could contaminate someone else. So my fear has always been, what if I get someone else sick? Why is that important? It's really important in treatment that you get to that root cause, because when we're doing high-level exposures, we're going to be addressing, well, maybe you did get your family sick, and making sure that you cross-contaminate family members and do certain things, right? That's going to be important. So my contamination was usually always around that, fear of germs and illness and giving it to other people. Now my OCD, I still have OCD in a lot of arenas, but my number one thing right now is around contamination and fears of bloodborne illnesses. So I struggle a lot with the fear of like HIV, Hep C, and we see this very commonly with OCD. Not individuals engaging in high-risk behavior, but individuals who are worried that by touching a doorknob I could get it, or by checking out at Starbucks, and what if he had a cut on his cuticle and had a disease and he touched my credit card and now I've gotten it, and engaging in all these washing behaviors. And so that's where my OCD is kind of at the most right now. A lot of my treatment is around engaging in those kind of greater good exposures. So one of my big exposures this year was that I have been avoiding going on a mission trip for a long time, because I felt like I was going to be exposed to things I wasn't ready to be exposed to or didn't want to. And I finally made the choice that my OCD isn't going to tell me how to live anymore, and I'm not going to not do these things that are important to me because of my illness. And so I went to Peru this spring, and did a mission trip there. And so that's kind of how a lot of my treatment is now, is setting these greater good things of like, I don't want my OCD to take that away, and so what can I do to work up to that, which gets me pretty motivated. Treatment every day can look like, I was at Walgreens about a month ago, and I saw a condom, a month ago, so it's like 2 years ago. Sorry, time flies. I saw a used condom wrapper, not a condom, on the floor in the parking lot. And I had the intrusive thought that, what if I stepped on it? What if I stepped near it? And so those shoes became contaminated. And although I Lysoled the bottom of them, I didn't throw them away. And so like everything that they had touched and that they were near became contaminated. So a lot of exposures are around like wearing those shoes, bringing them into my therapist's office. If I'm not willing to touch them, I'll have someone, or I can put them like inside, pick them up with a grocery bag, like a plastic bag, and then touch them that way and put the outside and bring them into the office and slowly do in-office exposures with them. So things like that is how kind of treatment looks every day for me. Oh yeah, so it becomes so debilitating. So what happens is it gets really confusing for people from the outside, because they're like, well, if they're afraid of contamination, they haven't showered in 2 years, they obviously aren't afraid of germs that much. Well, when a shower is taking you 6 to 8 hours, and it is exhausting, and by the end of those 6 to 8 hours, you still don't feel clean, you still don't feel any better, you start to avoid it. And so it's really important we look at avoidance when we're looking at OCD treatment. Avoidance is just as important as ritualizing. There can be individuals with severe to extreme OCD that will come in and they're not doing any rituals. And you can say, well, how do they have extreme OCD if they're not ritualizing? Well, if they're avoiding, not leaving their house, not leaving their scenario, not doing anything. I had someone that I've worked with before that's, trapped in a 4 to 6 foot area and doesn't move. You might not be ritualizing, but you're avoiding all of life. And so it's just as detrimental to the illness. So you start to avoid it because of the time.
Yes, I'm not sure about this, but can you talk about the efficacy of surgery? Is that ever...
Of surgery?
Surgery?
Yeah, great question. So I'm actually on an NIH-funded grant with Dr. Wayne Goodman. I'm also an assistant professor at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. So I do my clinical caseload there on Wednesdays, and I'm on a grant with him where we do DBS, which is deep brain stimulation for OCD. You only do DBS and should only consider DBS for very treatment refractory cases. So treatment refractory means that they've been been exposed to effective OCD treatment with a specialist, right? Not, oh, well, they've been in therapy for 10 years. Well, I have patients that have been in therapy for 16 years, but have never been exposed to proper OCD therapy. So we want to make sure that's the case. But for treatment refractory patients, DBS is done. DBS is done by inserting 2 electrodes into the brain, and it stimulates to try to counteract the OCD symptoms. DBS can be removed. Gamma knife is not really done anymore or really recommended because it is irreversible.
So you mentioned faith earlier, so I want to know what role did that play in you getting better? And then was it also something that may have hurt in the beginning or you know?
Great question. So faith plays a huge part in my treatment, recovery, and ability to be here. I think it was my protective factor against suicide for sure. Well, it was. I don't think. I mean, it absolutely was. So that's huge for me. And then my faith was so important to me, so my OCD latched onto it. So that's why scrupulosity is such a big part of my life and my OCD. And obviously lots of rituals. You know, some faith practices have ritualistic behaviors to begin with. And so when OCD's kind of trapped on, it takes a whole different hold, a whole different meaning. But for me, my entire journey and the way I understand it is, I don't believe God gave me OCD, but I believe he gave me the ability to make something good out of a terrible situation. And I've been able to kind of turn that into my whole life. And so my whole life purpose is based on the fact that I always had faith that God had a plan I couldn't understand, but it was there. And so that's kind of how things have played out for me.
I was curious, when you were describing those 3 years when your disease became escalated and worse, what was school like for you? How was your attendance? Did you have resources on campus?
Great question. So I went to a really expensive private school in the Woodlands. I'm going to skip the name because that's the right thing to do, I guess. And not really, but so I went to Mo Ranch with them, and I came back, and I got worse and worse, and I looked at A, B, C, and D as 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I had something wrong with almost every number, and they knew that. And at one point, there was like the school testing where for some reason the number 3 was only good at that time. Don't ask me why. And so I could only answer C even though I knew the answers. So I filled out C on the entire school testing, and they knew in advance. But I'll never forget that experience. The principal called me in and gave me the worst lecture that you could ever give a child suffering about how my actions were bringing down the entire school scores and what I was doing and how horrible this was. And the school counselor was great, Miss Donahue, and she had offered to give the test verbally because when she gave them verbally, I could give the answers, and if someone else filled it out, like it was still tough, but it wasn't as, but the school wouldn't let me. So they knew going in, and so anyway, they asked my parents and myself to not return. And so I don't get it. You know, you have a kid who's suffering and struggling, and this is the school I'd gone to my whole life, so now you're losing your friend group and everything at once. They still called my parents the next year and asked us to pay for the basketball stadium. So if you know my dad, that didn't go over well. He's pretty loyal to his kids. And anyway, so my private school experience was horrific. I moved to the public school in Houston, which was at Spring ISD, huge public school, 4,000 kids and really big, and it was a completely different experience for me. I had teachers, surprisingly, for the first time who asked to read books, asked my parents. We gave them books, we gave them information. They wanted to learn more, so they were super supportive. I did homebound when I got really sick, and so I worked from home, and the school system sent a teacher to the house where my mom would be there with me. And then when I went to Menninger, you do school there, and the high school teachers stayed in touch with all my treatment program at Menninger, kept up with everything, sent all my work, and then I came back, did homebound for a little bit, and then went back to school. So I was in and out, but the public school was surprising. I shouldn't say surprisingly, but like, you know, a free school compared to a school you're paying a lot for, it was night and day difference in the support I received for mental health. So thank you all so much. I know it's time, but my website, peaceofmind.com, you can find my email and contact information there. If not, my email is elizabeth@peaceofmind.com. I know I won't get to answer everyone's questions, so if you have questions, if you need resources, one of the things we do is we help find people the care that they need. So our goal is to get rid of all those barriers that exist, and we work hard to do that every day. So please email me with any questions. Thank you all. Okay.